From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with WisPolitics here with the Capital Chats podcast brought to you by Spectrum. This week, I spoke with John Vaudreuil, who is a former U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Wisconsin under President Obama. He also currently serves on the Wisconsin Advisory Council for the nonpartisan civic education group Keep Our Republic. We talked a little bit about President Trump's recent comments calling on Republicans to nationalize the elections process, which he said doesn't meet the constitutional muster. Here's what he had to say. All right. Well, thank you, John, for joining me on Capital Chats today. I think to get us started off, we're just going to talk a little bit about President Trump's recent comments related to elections. As you know, he said Republicans should, quote, take over and, quote, nationalize voting. And, several prominent Republicans have said they're not really on board with that idea, including actually our own Senator Ron Johnson. But I'm wondering, historically, are you aware of any attempts to control elections at the national level? And is that even something that would hold up from a constitutional standpoint?
Taking the second part of the question first, Kate,
Sure.
It would not hold up in any real world under our constitutional analysis. Right at the start, Article 1 of the Constitution, the founders said the elections will be set, the time, the place, the manner will be set by the states. Going back to, we really are a country of 50 states at that fundamental level. So for the president or anybody to suggest that this would be done as a lawful thing simply isn't possible. I'm not really, going to the first part of your question, I'm not aware of, there might have been rhetoric at some point, oh, gee, we should do this or do that, but I'm not aware of any attempt to take the running of elections away from the states. And I'm not aware of it happening because, frankly, it couldn't happen or shouldn't happen.
Yeah, so for those of us who may not be as familiar with the constitutional context for this, can you give us a little bit more background about why you believe this isn't constitutional?
Sure. Well, going back to 1789 and the Constitution itself, it is a federal republic, and it's really, our country is really different than, I do a lot of work internationally, but where we have 50 separate governing entities, the states, and the way the Constitution, and this was it was a big issue in founding the Constitution, and surprisingly, I guess, given what he's saying to President Trump and many of his supporters, states' rights are very important on very hot button issues, right to life, abortion. The president has said, we leave it to the states. And that's really the way our system is set up to a great extent. But specifically on voting, that is how the Constitution was written, to give the authority to the states to be the people, to be the entities that run the elections. It makes sense because ultimately, when you think about it, we have all these elections. Let's just talk about Wisconsin, whether it's for city, village, townships, and they're all state elections. We really have very few elections every 4 years for president, Congress and Senate now and then, but we really have very few elections where we elect any federal officers. So that's just kind of was a fundamental reason why the elections are left to the states, because frankly, most of the elections are state issues.
Sure. So I know you mentioned you haven't noticed any previous attempts to control elections at the national level. I want to ask you also, why do you think the current system of running elections at the state level is more effective?
Again, using Wisconsin as an example, most state election processes are decentralized. There isn't one person who says, here's how we're going to vote, or controls the vote, which, if there is a corruption issue, it's easy. I was a prosecutor my entire career. The easiest type of system to corrupt is one where you got one person, one man or woman you can bribe or whatever. So decentralizing our federal elections, meaning 50 states running it lots of different ways, really leads, in my view, to a much more trustworthy system. And as Keep Our Republic, as we've done over and over, what we've tried to do is explain to people in Wisconsin how well that system works here. Just to hit the basic points, it is probably the most decentralized election process in the country. We have about 1,800 clerks running our elections, from our county clerk to our city municipal clerks to villages to townships, to townships where 10 people are voting. These are all the clerks running our elections, and they do it from start to finish. They control registration. They handle the volunteers at our polling places. They count the votes. They recount the votes if needed. They certify, ultimately, our elections. And lest we forget, most importantly, perhaps from that system, some of these are Democrats. Some of these are Republicans. Some of them are independent. But basically, in our very localized election laws here in Wisconsin, they are our friends and they are our neighbors. And that sort of system should lead to us having great faith, because there's just so many people who are trying so hard to do nothing more than register the people who can vote, get the polling places up and running, and do all the process of the election, that it just leads to what we should all believe is very trustworthy.
Now, if elections were nationalized, it doesn't necessarily seem likely at this point, but I'm curious, what would that mean for the way elections would work in Wisconsin?
Well, it's hard to predict, but I would assume that what they're talking about, and there's laws pending in Congress that don't appear to be getting much traction right now, but who knows, that want to require voter ID to be used. It's all about, lest we not forget, this whole claim by the president and other people is that, to a great extent, our elections are fraud because non-citizens are voting. Whether they're here legally, whether they're here illegally, they're not citizens. So they want a law that says only citizens can vote. That's already the law. They want voter ID, nationalized voter ID. I can't speak for the other states. I believe most states have some sort of voter ID. Wisconsin has probably the most vigorous voter ID requirement of all the 50 states. When you go to the poll, you've got to present a certain type of ID. There's a list in the law, and it's various types. So if it was nationalized, what we're talking about is, to a great extent, redundant to Wisconsin. Oh, let's have vigorous voter ID. Well, we've already got vigorous voter ID. The biggest changes that you would see that would affect not only Wisconsin, but many, many, many states, if not all the states, are attacked on mailed-in ballots, early voting, the way we do it in Wisconsin, and attack on machine counting. The idea being, in my view, if we went back to 1850 and didn't mail anything in, and you had to get on your horse and ride someplace, mind you, could only be a white man voting at the time, and we counted everything by hand, it would all be more secure, which is really just rubbish when we think about it. We all, we rely on our phones to do our calculations. We do our taxes. We do everything, and we trust it. And what we're talking about here is a Wisconsin system where, by law, the machines are tested publicly. You can go to watch your machines being tested. Our mailed-in ballots are secure. I know there's been discussion over the drop boxes and so on, and we can talk about that certainly. But basically, we try to make it easy for people to vote. If it's hard for my 94-year-old neighbor to get to the poll, she can fill out her absentee ballot. I'll sign it. I seal it up. We put it in the drop box or the mailbox. We should be trying to make it easy for people to vote, with standards to make sure people who should vote can vote. So the nationalizing of it at its best level is redundant, but its worst, it's fixing a problem that doesn't exist.
Yeah, what do you think the president's motivation would be for this desire to nationalize elections?
My assessment would be that he is basing this nationalize the elections claim or proposal. He keeps saying because they're all fraud. In these 15 unnamed places, I'm sure Wisconsin and Minnesota being a couple of them, And he's saying it's because all these people are voting and they're non-citizens. And you know the claims, so the other side brought them in so they could vote. So I think, but unfortunately, I think the motive really has to be, and my great fear, not that they're going to nationalize elections between now and the next election, but based on this claim that has been disproven time and time again, whether it's a Democratic think tank, a Republican think tank, nonpartisan think tank, is we at Keep Our Republic keep saying all of these studies show there simply is no significant fraud in non-citizen voting. Second point I would make quickly on that is that I would like people listening to think of this way. If you're in this country lawfully, but you have a visa, student visa, or work visa, maybe you have a green card, why would you ever jeopardize this really treasured status by going to vote? I mean, already 40% of us don't vote. So why do we think that all these votes are being made up by people who are risking everything simply to vote, when all they really want is a job? They want to provide for their families and themselves. So he takes this claim that is, quite frankly, rubbish. It's shown to be by everybody. And I think what is happening is they are sowing distrust. He's attempting to sow distrust in the process and the results. If, as many pollsters say, this may be a Democratic swing in the midterm elections, it seems from this rhetoric that the president wants to set up an argument. Well, see, it was all fraud. I told you ahead of time it'd be all fraud. And that's really from Keep Our Republic's perspective, what we try to counteract is this fear that there will be distrust in our process. If you don't trust the process, that means you don't trust your clerk, city clerk, county clerk, all those clerks I mentioned. You don't trust your friends and neighbors. You don't trust the people who are sitting at the polls, volunteering their time to check your IDs and so on. And that's really the big concern about this claim of nationalization based on fraud, is that we sow distrust in our process.
Well, thank you again, John, for joining me on the podcast. Is there anything else you want to add about this topic before we wrap it up?
I guess I would add one thing, Kate, because it keeps coming up. The other fear is that this claim that it's all fraud and it should be nationalized might lead, and already has led, to people saying, well, we need to send in federal troops to check the IDs at the polls. We need, whether it's ICE, I think Steve Bannon said, send in the 82nd Airborne or the 101st Air. I mean, completely preposterous. I don't think even the president is saying we're going to send in the military. But if people think they're going to go to the polls and there might be armed federal presence, which in itself is against the law, that will tamp down voting. That will, again, lead to attacks on our clerks, on the people running the polls. And it's those things that I hope people listening think about. This is not the way our system is set up here in Wisconsin, that we can vote. If you're allowed to vote, you should be allowed to vote, and you should do it without fear. And our elections are run for that. So that's my other concern, this idea that there might be a federal presence, which may never happen, but people are afraid.
Well, thank you again for joining me on the podcast. All right, everyone, if you would like to learn more about the elections process in Wisconsin, you can head to our website at wispolitics.com. In the meantime, I'm Kate Morton. You're listening to WisPolitics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.